Okay, my name's Howell. I'm the parish priest at Christ Church in Little Drayton, and today I'm going to do a little presentation that I've done quite a few times before on how can a scientist be a priest. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because I am a scientist. I used to work in a genetics lab in Cambridge before I started training for the priesthood. And when I tell people that, they usually respond a bit like this. Oh, they say. Really? And it's almost as if they kind of can't get over it because they've been told so many times that scientists can't believe in God. It's like an impossibility. So in order to put that right, I've decided to do this little presentation. So today we're going to look at some questions. The first question is, what is evolution? Because I think evolution is just as misunderstood in the popular understanding of it as Christian understandings of the Bible, really. So the first thing we'll look at is what is evolution, explain what it is. And then later on in some later videos we'll say, what does the Bible really say about creation? And that's another important question, so we can put some of the myths about the Bible into perspective, and in the same way we put in some myths about evolution into perspective too. And then the final question is, can these two work together? So to begin with, here's Charles Darwin. Here he is, and he says, I propose that a species can evolve into another species in response to natural selection. That's basically what the discovery of natural selection is. So here's Spider-Man, and Spider-Man says, what on earth does that mean? So Darwin says, okay, well, let's talk about farming. And that's quite good, because Spider-Man, he likes tractor rides. I know that. So first thing we look at, here's Farmer Giles. All farmers are called Farmer Giles, and Farmer Giles has got a cow called Daisy, and he's got another cow called Caroline. Now Farmer Giles knows that both these cows produce milk, but by random chance and variations within the species of cows, Daisy produces 10 litres of milk a day, while Caroline only produces 5. And what Farmer Giles wants to do is maximise the amount of milk that he produces, so he can make more money out of the mother. So he comes along now, here's Farmer Giles again, and Farmer Giles has Daisy, and he puts Daisy in the field with Bill the Bull. Now Bill the Bull's mum was a really good milker, and Bill the Bull's mum used to produce 10 litres of milk a day. So they get busy, and they produce offspring Daisy the second. There you go. So Farmer Giles is controlling the reproduction of Daisy and Bill the Bull in order to maximise the amount of milk that he gets. So here we are, here's Farmer Giles again, and he's happier now because he's got Daisy the second and Daisy the second's sister as well, and they go on to produce milk, and Daisy the second produces 30 litres of milk. That's an increase of 3 litres from Daisy the first, and Daisy the second produces 12 litres of milk. And they do this because he's selected to mate Daisy with Bill the Bull, because Bill the Bull's mum was a very good milker. And Farmer Giles can go and do this again and again and again. So here's Daisy the second again. Bert the Bull now, because Bert the Bull, his mum was a really good milker, and she produced 12 litres of milk a day. They get busy, and they produce Daisy the third. And he goes on and on and on, doing that over and over and over again, until you get Daisy the 200th, and Daisy the 200th sister, and they produce milk. And because he's repeated this process over and over and over again, we have 50 litres of milk from Daisy the 200th, and 47 litres of milk from Daisy the 200th sister. So by selectively breeding and choosing who can reproduce and who can't reproduce, Farmer Giles can get loads and loads of milk through selective breeding, and human beings have done that for centuries. And selective breeding relies on a principle called positive feedback. Now, positive feedback works like this. Now, if you were ever bored in maths in school, you might have had a calculator a bit like this, and when the teacher's going on and on and on and you're thinking, oh, shut up, you'll start mucking about with your calculator. So you'll put in 1 times 2 is 2, and then you'll say 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 2 is 8, 8 times 2 is 16, 16 times 2 is 32, and you keep on pressing the equals button to continually times everything by 2, and eventually you'll get really, 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 really big numbers, and you think, wow, that's great. Or what you could do is write rude things in your calculator if ever you did that. 55378008, and then turn the calculator upside down and everyone goes, oh, there we are. So positive feedback is basically taking the answer to a question and feeding it into the next calculation. So 1 times 2 is 2, and you take that 2 and you times that by 2, and you take the 4 and you times that by 2, and so on and so on and so on and so on. That's what positive feedback is. So let's look at a picture of that. So what we see is we've got a graph here, and on the right hand side you've got a blue graph, and what that is the times in that we've just shown, going times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, going all the way up, and you see it's got a huge amplification effect. So by the time you get to the 10th time you've done it, you're already at 1,000, and that'll go up and up and up on to infinity. And the red line on the other side is a division version of that, where you've got a really big number and you're dividing it by 2, and then dividing it by 2, and then dividing it by 2, and dividing it by 2, on and on and on and on. And that goes down into infinity. And these are very important to remember, these ideas of feedback. There's times in by 2, or adding 2, it depends, it doesn't matter how way you do it, or dividing by 2. So to explain this a bit better, positive feedback we all know about. So here we have to demonstrate it. Kirk Hammett, who is the lead guitarist of Metallica, who are the best metal band in the whole world. That's a fact. We're not going to argue about that, because Kirk Hammett is amazing. So Kirk Hammett's doing his guitar solo, and the sound comes out of his guitar via a speaker, and then the sound from the speaker goes out and then feeds back into his guitar, and then that amplified sound goes back into the speaker over and over and over again, and then you can turn the volume right up to 11 because it just gets really, really, really loud. And metal musicians use feedback over and over again. Jimi Hendrix used it very famously way back in Woodstock. So we're familiar with this, with sound systems, like if you get too close to the microphone in church with another microphone, it makes a horrible wee noise, and that is feedback. So there's no farmers in nature, so if you haven't got Farmer Giles, how does nature select in exactly the same way as Farmer Giles? Now that is natural selection. That's the same principle, and that's how Darwin got his idea, really. He saw that nature selects in a similar way to the way Farmer Giles selects in order to transform species from one thing into another. So nature can select by asteroids hitting the Earth. That's one example. Another example of how nature selects is through antibiotics. There's our friendly antibiotic there. And the third way it selects is through death. And this one represents the bubonic plague. And what we're going to do in the next video is look at how nature selects in exactly the same way as Farmer Giles, using positive feedback in order to evolve species from one into another. Okay, so we're back again, and what we're going to do now is look at 3 examples of how nature acts just like the farmer in selecting various traits and driving evolution forward. There's thousands and thousands of examples of how this works, but I've just chosen 3. So our first example is the dinosaurs and the extinction of the dinosaurs. Now, back 65 million years ago, there were far, far more dinosaurs than there were mammals. But along came an asteroid and smashed into the Earth, and that asteroid killed off all the dinosaurs. In fact, it killed off over 90% of life on Earth. So there was a huge change there. So the world really died, pretty much. And the reason these dinosaurs died off is they weren't adapted to the new environment caused by the asteroid for various different reasons. So because then there was far more food knocking about, because there was far less animals about to compete for the food, the mammals which were left over had a field day and multiplied and multiplied and multiplied and multiplied. So we got rid of the dinosaurs because they weren't very well adapted, and instead we were left with mammals which were adapted to the new environment after the asteroid hit. So our little mammal says the world of the dinosaurs died, and that world was reborn in the world of the mammals. Now, how do we know that? What evidence is there for that? Well, if we look back through the fossil record, you can see here, this is a classic diagram of the fossil record. You'll be able to see what they call mass extinctions, where over 90% of life on Earth is killed off either by an asteroid or various other means. So the first one was just before the dinosaurs. Well, not the first one. One of them was just before the dinosaurs, just at the end of the Permian period. And that killed off nearly all life, and out of that mass death, the dinosaurs ruled the Earth in exactly the same way as the mammals did. And then 65 million years ago, there's another mass death, and the mammals took over the world. The world of the dinosaurs died and is reborn as the world of the mammals. And we know that because basically if you look through the fossil record, you won't find any dinosaur fossils after 65 million years, and you won't find any dinosaur fossils before about 252 million years ago. So that's how we know. We can go through the fossil record. So another example of how evolution works is something we're all pretty much familiar with now, is through bacteria. Now then, here's our bacteria. This one could be something like Staphylococcus aureus, something like that. And this person now is infected with all these horrible Staph aureus bacteria. So he goes into hospital and he's given an antibiotic. There he is. So he's given something like, say, methicillin. And the methicillin will then kill off most of the bacteria. Now, because our patient is a bit naughty and feels better and doesn't finish the course of antibiotics, not all the bacteria die off. Some of them are left, and the ones which are left are the ones which are resistant to methicillin. And because there's very few bacteria knocking about, that guy has a field day and reproduces and reproduces and reproduces and reproduces. And that's how we get MRSA, methicillin resistant Staphylococcus aureus. So we go from an ordinary bug like Staph aureus to a superbug, methicillin resistant Staph aureus. Evolution works far, far faster with bacteria because the generation, say, for a human being is, say, 15 to 20 years, because it takes us 15 to 20 years after we're born to be able to reproduce, but it takes 15 to 20 minutes for a bacteria to reproduce. So it drives far, far, far faster, which is how we can see it when we can't see it with human beings so much. we have to look back at the fossil record, so it takes thousands and thousands of years. So here we have the DNA code, and you can see the famous double helix there, the famous double helix structure. And what DNA is basically is a series of chemicals called bases, and each of them is represented by a different letter, so A, T, C and G. And those letters, or those bases, given what order they are, code for the amino acids, and the amino acids are joined together to make proteins. And it's by reading these codes, these DNA codes, that we put together lots and lots of these other chemicals called amino acids, which then in turn make proteins, which then in turn make an organism. That could be any organism, a plant, a bacteria, a human being, doesn't really matter. It all works in exactly the same way. And the letters are coded for in a kind of triplet form, it's called. So you have ATG, that means start, so that means start making a protein. And the next one then we've got here is CTA, which codes for arginine. And then the last one on this example is GGC, which codes for glycine. I used to have these codes on my mouse mat back in the lab, so I could try and remember what each of those three letters, each triplet code, actually coded for with the amino acids. So in this next slide now you can see how it all works. You have the DNA code or the RNA code on the bottom, and then that's joined together with another form of RNA, and they all join together to form the various different peptide chains which make proteins. So it just basically joins together all these different chemicals coded for by the DNA, which makes an organism. That's how it works. So what does a gene look like? So a gene looks like this. This is part of the CTLA4 gene, which is involved in the immune system, and it's the gene that I studied when I worked in the lab. We were working on the genetics of type 1 diabetes, and that's basically all a gene is a big long list of letters which represent the different chemical bases in the DNA molecule. That's all it is. So let's compare two species and their DNA. So here we are, here's Farmer Giles again, the human being, and we're going to compare him to a chimpanzee. I like that picture. It's not really a chimp, it's more like a monkey because it's got a tail, but I like the picture, so I put it in. So chimps and humans do look very, very similar. They have very similar behaviours. They have very similar brain sizes if you compare across the animal kingdom. So they are very, very similar animals. And if you go to the zoo, you'll be amazed how human-like chimpanzees are. So therefore, we should expect, when we look at the DNA of a human and of a chimp, them to be very, very similar. So let's have a look. So what we have here are two DNA sequences. The top one in the black is humans, and the bottom one in the red is the chimpanzee. And chimps are 98.5% the same as humans genetically. There's only a couple of differences in this little example here. You can see there's an A that's different. It's a G in chimps, and an A in chimps, which is a G in humans further up. So human beings and chimps are very similar, but they're even more similar when we look at the genetics. When we look at the actual DNA code of both organisms, we are very, very similar, far more similar than you would first think just by looking at the two animals. So let's compare another one. So here we have Farmer Giles again. Hiya Farmer Giles, how are you? So it's Farmer Giles, and we'll compare him with a rat. Now, there's only a few million years of evolution between a human being and a chimp, which is why we're genetically so similar. So we branched off from the tree not so long ago in geological time from a chimp. But for a rat, it's far, far, far further away. We're talking tens of millions of years. of evolution separating a human being and a rat. And rats don't look very similar to human beings. You know, they're both mammals, but we're very, very different. So let's have a look at the DNA of a rat and a human. So you can see here, rat on the bottom, human on the top. And you can see that there's, again, they are very different, but there's patches which are really, really quite similar, far more similar than we'd expect just by random chance. So if you look at the genetics of a rat and a human being, or a human being and a rabbit, or anything like that, you will see there are patches of similarity, even though we split off them in the evolutionary tree a very, very long time ago, millions, tens of millions of years ago. So the theory of evolution is confirmed really by the fossil record and by the fact that lots of animals look very similar, but also, more than anything, by our genetics. When you look at the gene code of various different animals, they are amazingly similar. So the evidence for evolution from genetics is overwhelming. So what we'll do now is we'll have a look at the evolution of diabetes. So our third example of evolution is how we evolved the disease diabetes. Now this is the CTLA4 gene that I spent a huge amount of time studying, and what we found was, you can see the various letters underneath where it says human, CT, CT, AG, etc. They are mutations. And the one we're interested in here is the one on the end, that one there. That's called CT60, and that is, in some people will have a G in position 12131, and other people will have a C. That's the mutation. And that's why I spent years and years and years looking at tiny little difference in our DNA. And what does CTLA4 do? Well, CTLA4 is a protein on a white blood cell called a T cell, and it's involved in the immune system. So basically it's that little purple thing there that sticks out to the side of a white blood cell. So what does it do? Why is it important? Well, what it does is, a T cell, that type of white blood cell that is involved in our immune system, is a bit like a general and in a war. If we think of our immune system as an army, then the T cell, the T helper cell, is a bit like a general in the army. And the CTLA4 molecule says, cease fire! So CTLA4 is basically an off switch on a white blood cell that tells the immune system to stop. That's put very basically. Apologies to the guys I used to work with, that's put very, very, very simply. So as I was saying about the off switch, if you've got a certain mutation which causes your off switch in your immune system to not switch off as quickly, then if you imagine your immune system a bit like an army, then the army won't stop fighting as quickly. So if the general can't shout cease fire as quickly as somebody else's, then the army will continue to fight. So people with these mutations do have a better immune system than those who don't. So if we think about diabetes, for instance, this diagram we're looking at now shows that people with a better immune system have more chance of getting diabetes or another autoimmune disorder, because the immune system isn't switched off as quickly. So the immune system can turn on our own bodies, and that's what an autoimmune disorder is where our own immune system attacks us. So the better your immune system, the more chance of that immune system attacking you, but the worse your immune system, the less likely that is to happen. That's the basis of what we're talking about. So why do we have autoimmune diseases? Well, let's go back to the medieval period to find out. So we have here Mr. Medieval, There he is, and he's looking for a wife, and he's got a perspective on you, potential Mrs. Medieval 1, and he thinks, ooh, wouldn't mind going after her. But then he sees potential Mrs. Medieval number 2, and he thinks, oh great, I'm off with her, that's great. But let's have a look at their genetics. So Mr. Medieval, he's got the G mutation, so that means he's got a very, very slightly better immune system. Mrs. Medieval 1, she's G as well, very, very slightly better immune system, isn't switched off as quickly. But what about potential Mrs. Medieval 2? Well, she's got the C, so she is slightly worse off, very, very slightly worse off with her immune system. So what's going to happen in the medieval period? Well, here he comes, 1348, the Black Death. Along he comes, and anybody who hasn't got a tip-top immune system is in big trouble, because the Black Death wiped out 50% of the population of Europe. So that's a huge selective pressure. Bye bye, potential Mrs. Medieval 2. So poor old Mr. Medieval, he really wanted to go with her, but he can't. So he's stuck now. He's got to go with a person with a good immune system, because everybody else is dead. So that's been taken out of his hands. So he is selected. The Black Death has put a selective pressure to make Mr. Medieval go off with someone with a good immune system, because everybody else is dead. And that just didn't happen once. It says here the major outbreak of the disease struck roughly every 20 to 30 years, killing around 20% of London's population each time. There were lesser outbreaks in between the major ones, and sometimes the disease could continue for several years in a less serious form. So the Black Death or bubonic plague, and that's just one disease, has a huge selective pressure on people with bad or slightly impaired or immune systems. So let's fast forward now. So here we are, Mr. Medieval the 25th, he's knocking around now, and he's looking for a potential wife. So he looks around and he finds, ooh, potential Mrs. Medieval the 25th, and there she is. Oh, she's back again, potential Mrs. Medieval the 25th. Who's he going to go for? Well, he's got the G, she's got the G. Whoop, poor old Mrs. Medieval 2 the 25th, she's got the C. Oh, the last major plague of London, 1665. Bye bye. So you see, it's exactly the same principle as we looked with the cows earlier on. Is basically Mr. Medieval can't breed with the person he wants to. He's got to breed with the person who the selective pressure makes him do it. So his immune system's slightly better. He breeds with someone with a good immune system, so his children have a better immune system again. So over all these different generations, we have to develop much, much better immune systems, just like those cows developed the ability to produce more and more milk. But it's not a farmer dictating this, it's naturally things like the plague, diseases, and so on. And that's just one example, and that's why we have autoimmune diseases, and that's why we have really good immune systems today. So evolution isn't gradual. People often think about it as something where we gradually start off as a chimp and then gradually up and become a human being. That's not how it works. I hope you've seen that already. How it works is this: it's not steady but in short bursts in response to mass death. So there we go, there's a mass death, and there's a burst of change through positive feedback. Going back to the cows right at the beginning, it's that positive feedback loop that enables evolution to change things fairly rapidly over geological time. And then once the pressure goes, so the Black Death goes, or the asteroid goes, or whatever it is, the species then will stabilise because there's no pressure on it, and they'll just carry on as it is for ages. There's things like turtles and tortoises and other animals have been the same for hundreds of millions of years, but that's because they've never had these selective pressures put on them. So evolution appears to be chaotic, but it is ordered using positive feedback. So in other words, it seems to be like complete chaos, but it is actually underlying it this ordered mathematical principle of positive feedback, just like the way in which the cows were bred, as we saw earlier on. So there's the cow. That evolution of the cow is controlled by the farmer to give more milk. The evolution of the mammals is controlled by the hitting of the asteroid in exactly the same way, and it's that positive feedback loop, as we talked about earlier, that drives that evolution forward. Same with the bug, and the same with Mr. Medieval. Now the next thing to talk about is self-similarity. Now this is another underlying principle that lies underneath evolution itself. It's hardwired into our universe, just like positive feedback is hardwired into our universe. So to describe what that is, I'll draw a picture. So here we have a line. Now if I took that line and I said, right, what I'll do is I'll branch off that line at half its length. So I'll put one there. So that little line there is half the length, or approximately half the length of the line below it. So I'll branch off there, and I'll branch off the other side. And what I'll do is I'll repeat that pattern, okay, of branching. So half the length of that line is about that much. There you go. And I'll do the same on the other side. Half the length. So it's the same mathematical formula. Take half the length, branch it off, and move forward. So again, do it again the third time. Half the length. There we go. Branch it off. Like that. So that drawing now is done purely mathematically, and badly because I'm not very good on PowerPoint. It took ages to do that. Now what does that look like? Looks like a tree. And if you look at a tree, you'll see it follows roughly that same mathematical formula. Going up, branching, and then the next branch is half the length of the original one. Branching off again, half the length, branching off again, half the length. And that looks remarkably similar to a river. If you look at a river, this is the Amazon River, you'll see that each of the tributaries that feed into the river work in pretty much the same way. Half the length, branch off, half the length again, branch off, half the length again, branch off. And the river can look like a leaf. Look at this leaf. Look at the way it goes up, and how the different veins going off are equal to that formula, roughly. Half the length, branch off, half the length again, branch off, half the length again, branch off, into infinity. And there's another couple of examples. There you go. Our lungs and our blood vessels are the same as well, and our nerves, all sorts of things. All look like trees. That idea of branch off, half the length again, branch off, half the length again. So underlying each of these things is a mathematical formula, and it's called self-similarity. So with self-similarity, you can use the same ratio to draw a different picture. So this is the other picture that you can use it to draw. You can see here the blue line is the length between the curve and the centre, and if you add a power to it as you go along, so for instance if x is 5, then x squared will be 25, and so on, in x to the power of 3, x to the power of 4, x to the power of 5. So as it increases, as it goes around like that, you will draw a spiral. So it's the same golden ratio that you see in trees. So things which seem on the faces of it quite chaotic, like for instance a hurricane. Hurricanes are when you first look at them, completely chaotic and random, like Evolution. It seems massively random and completely chaotic. But if you look out of it and look at it from space, you'll see they always form a spiral. And it's the same proportions of that spiral as the one I just drew, which are the same proportions as the tree, as the lungs, as everything else. It's that constant doubling through the principle of positive feedback. It's that feedback loop that makes it appear as a spiral or as a tree. It's the ratios that are important. So even though they appear to be chaotic, they're actually extremely ordered. This is my favourite picture I've found. Here we have a tennis ball which got wet, and it's flying through the air, and the water itself is forming a spiral in exactly the same proportions as the one we saw for the hurricane and the one that I drew earlier. And our galaxy, the spiral galaxy itself, will be in the same proportions. It's mind-boggling really that all these different things are linked by a very, very simple mathematical formula using feedback. So the same feedback formula that governs evolution governs the formations of galaxies, of cyclones, of water that spins around tennis balls, of lungs, of trees, of all those sorts of things. Underneath it all is this wonderful mathematical formula using feedback. So those things which appear to be random, like evolution, when we get underneath it, they're really very ordered. Now then, what you can do is, if it's the summer holidays and you want to keep your kids occupied for ages, you can get them to draw that spiral. So there's my little lad now with his protractor and his ruler, and he's sitting down, he's drawing that spiral for me on a piece of paper, and he loved doing that, and he went on for ages. It was brilliant, and he really enjoyed doing it. So you can either draw it yourself like that, or you can draw it the easy way, and you can get a computer program to draw it for you. So here's a computer program that uses that mathematical formula, half it again, half it again, just like with the tree. And the computer program can draw that spiral by using those simple mathematical rules. And actually, the computer can draw it far better than my Andrew can. Not because my Andrew's not a very good drawer, but because it's more precise using the mathematics. And we'll see that now in the way in which Disney make their new films. Now, we've got your Little Mermaid versus Monsters University. Now, there's better songs in Little Mermaid, I have to say, I think. But let's have a look at the animation. Now, Little Mermaid was done with the old cells. It was the last film to use the old cell animation, where somebody sat down each individual cell and painted it himself. So he sat down and designed and painted and created, in that sense, each individual cell, and then they put them all together and you got the Little Mermaid. But Monsters University was done in a very different way. Yeah, they drew the basics of Monsters University, but the actual hair, if you see the hair on Sully and the hair on Ariel, the hair on Sully looks far, far more lifelike. Because what they did was, and what they do in all the Pixar films, is they design the hairs and the environment, and they get that environment to evolve using these principles. So the CGI that you see all the time in all the new films isn't drawn on like Ariel was, or created in that way. It was created by somebody sitting down, putting in the mathematical formulas and mapping onto the various characters these attributes, like the hair and so on, and things like that. So actually Sully has been evolved. He wasn't drawn, he actually evolved, because they used the maths to make him look far more lifelike, and used the same maths to make Sully as they use, as we have with trees and galaxies and all that. They use the same formulas to make Sully as to make a tree. That feedback loop that allows them to get that marvellous lifelikeness. So just remember that slide, that's very important, that slide is. So just to review, or begin a review, galaxies have the same proportions as trees, etc, etc. And what a lot of people say is evolution couldn't have happened because it's so unlikely, because it's so random, it's such a random thing, but it's not. Life is hardwired into our universe. The mathematics that lie behind evolution actually make it very likely, because it's the only way it can happen. The feedback loops that exist within trees and galaxies and evolution itself are laws which are hardwired into our universe, making life itself quite a likely event in that sort of sense. So it's the laws that underlie evolution which enable it to take place. In the same way, we have the law of gravity and the law of electrostatics and all sorts of other laws, physical laws of the universe. It's the same with evolution. Underlying it is that feedback loop that we talked about right at the beginning with the cows, that enable it through that mathematical formula to bring forth life. So just like Sully evolved because someone put the formula into the computer and mapped it onto him, and that's why his hair looks far better than Ariel's does and far more lifelike, because they've engineered it in that sort of sense through the mathematical formula to evolve into Sully. So let's review. So evolution acts by natural selection, where nature selects traits just like a farmer does. Evidence for evolution is overwhelming. Well, hopefully I've showed that, but you know, some people say I don't believe in evolution, and there's nothing really to believe in. It's like gravity. It's just there. It's a law, like gravity is. And if you don't believe in gravity, you can kind of jump off a very high building and you'll find out very quickly that it does work. So evolution is not random, but set by universal laws. Now that's the thing, evolution isn't random in that sense, but it is set by that law of feedback and the underlying principles in it. And things appear to be different, yet are similar. So that goes back to the ideas with the chimpanzees and with the rats and so on and things like that. Is things in life seem to be very, very, very different. But if you go right down into the DNA, we're actually very, very similar. And it doesn't take many changes in the DNA to make things be very, very different on the surface. And things can appear to be chaotic, yet are ordered. So that talks about, for instance, the galaxy or the hurricane or any of those other things. We appear to live in a very chaotic world, and it is on one level very, very chaotic and random, but on another level it is incredibly ordered, be that the process of evolution or a hurricane or anything. Underlying life itself and the universe itself are some very basic and simple rules, and we can use those same rules to give us Sully with his hair. So I hope you've enjoyed this series of little videos about evolution, and I'll do some more work soon on how that ties into the Bible